There is a long history of men dressing up as women to avoid military service. For example, Bonnie Prince Charlie disguised himself as a maidservant to avoid the Battle of Culloden. However, there is no other cross-dressing soldier more famous than Corporal Maxwell Klinger of MASH, fictional though he may be. Played to perfection by Jamie Farr throughout much of the series, Klinger dressed in flamboyant dresses and outfits that he himself made in a bid to be discharged from the Army through a Section 8. But Klinger is said to be based on another comedy legend who, unlike Klinger, was successful in his bid to be discharged. That comedian was Lenny Bruce. Was Lenny Bruce like Klinger from MASH? Did he wear women's clothing to get himself discharged from the service? And was Klinger truly based on this daring comic legend? According to Klinger actor Jamie Farr, MASH creator Larry Gelbart did indeed base the character on comedian Lenny Bruce, who was discharged from the Navy at the end of World War II for, among other things, wearing women's clothing. Larry Gelbart said that the particular clothing that Lenny Bruce wore was a woman's wave uniform. If so, this is not exactly the same as Klinger's dresses, although it is close to what Klinger wore in his very first MASH appearance, and those wave uniforms did include a skirt. Let's dive deeper into the story of how Lenny Bruce got himself kicked out of the military. Lenny Bruce, unlike Klinger, was not drafted into the service. Bruce, whose real name was Leonard Alfred Schneider, joined the U.S. Navy at the age of 16 in 1942 and served actively during World War II aboard the USS Brooklyn in such places as Northern Africa, Palermo, and Anzio, Italy. As one story goes, in 1945 he was performing for his fellow sailors dressed in drag. This upset his commanders a bit. They had the ship's medical officer examine him, and Bruce then convinced the ship's medical officer that he was experiencing homosexual urges. Another version of the story was told by Jamie Farr, which he probably got from Larry Gelbart. In this version, the sailors are told to show up in the dress of the day, which would either be a regular duty uniform or a dress uniform. As a joke, Lenny Bruce, since the instructions said dress of the day, showed up in a dress. Both these stories may be correct, as he may have played this joke to entertain his buddies. The odd thing is, sailors dressing in drag as entertainment on ships was not unusual, sometimes without sanction, just in private for giggles, and other times with official sanction of the command. Even as more women were entering the service, they were barred from performing during that period, so sailors did indeed dress as women to entertain their fellow sailors. On U.S. Navy ships, this occurred especially for the Neptunus Rex crossing the line ceremonies, where the sailors performed King Neptune's court during a ceremony commemorating a sailor's first crossing of the equator. Women couldn't be in the show, but they were allowed to hold workshops teaching the men how to apply makeup and other things. So Lenny Bruce wasn't doing anything all that unusual. Regardless of how it actually occurred, he was subsequently found to be unfit for military service. He received an undesirable and therefore dishonorable discharge in July 1945. And this is amazing and so unusual. According to actual unearthed naval documents, he later successfully applied to get his undesirable discharge changed to under honorable conditions by reason of unsuitability for naval service. How undesirable and unsuitable for service should be any different, I didn't care to pursue for the purposes of this video, but an honorable discharge is always better than a dishonorable one. Now, the role of Klinger was originally meant to be a bit part on MASH, just one appearance. Klinger was to appear once as a goofy and quite hairy man wearing a dress on guard duty to shock a colonel. Jamie Farr didn't even have to audition for the role. Producer and director Gene Reynolds had seen Jamie Farr on the television show F Troop, a sitcom about U.S. soldiers and American Indians in the Wild West during the Civil War era. Farr played an Indian named Stand-Up Bull, a stand-up comic Indian and friend to Geronimo, whose lines consisted of Henry Youngman-style one-liners turned into Native American jokes. Instead of, "Take my wife, please," Stand-Up Bull would say, "Take my squaw, please," for example. Jamie Farr appeared in 2 episodes of F Troop, one uncredited and one as Stand-Up Bull. The director of the Stand-Up Bull episode was none other than Gene Reynolds himself. When Larry Gelbart came up with the idea for a cross-dressing soldier bucking for a Section 8, similar to the story of Lenny Bruce, Gene Reynolds knew that the only person who could play him was Jamie Farr, and played him brilliantly he did. Ironically, if Klinger had been portrayed as anything like homosexual, it's quite clear that he would have been discharged. Yet Jamie Farr has told the story of his first appearance as Klinger being quite different than the performance we see on the show. Klinger first appeared in Season 1, Episode 4, entitled Chief Surgeon Who? In his first scene, Klinger wore an Army's Women Corps uniform, or WAC uniform, on guard duty with huge high heels. He stops and confronts a visiting general, General Barker, played by Sorrel Book, most famous for being Boss Hogg on The Dukes of Hazzard. Later he shows up again, but this time completely naked except for his cap from the WAC uniform, but still carrying his rifle because Klinger never shirked his duty. The general is shocked, but Hawkeye and Trapper, who are also there, take it in stride. Jamie Farr, in an interview, described what happened. So Jamie Farr said that all he had was a couple of lines. He was wearing a WAC outfit with a rifle and came out of the bushes and said, "Halt, who goes there?" And Sorrel Books responds, "Oh, Corporal Klinger, still trying to get out of the Army?" And Klinger says, "Yes, that's right, Mary," and goes skipping off. But according to Farr, Gene Reynolds and Larry Gelbart didn't stay during the filming of this scene. They left. A first-time guest director named E.W. Swackhammer was directing. He told Farr to do it in more of a homosexual way, with an effeminate lisp, or something to that effect. Farr obviously had reservations, but as he explained, he wasn't one to complain. He would come in, do what he was asked to do, get his salary, and go home. He didn't fight with people, so he did it in the way Swackhammer asked, including the other lines when Klinger shows up again, this time naked except for his rifle and cap. So the next day, Jamie Farr got a phone call, and it was Gene Reynolds and Larry Gelbart. They said, "Jamie, we can't have this character act like this. This character couldn't possibly exist this way. Can you come in? We need to reshoot it." Farr was afraid he had really done something wrong and thought, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." He had been paid $250 for the day. The producers told him they would pay him another $250, so please come on in and talk with them. So Jamie went in and they said, "What can we do with this? We can't do it that way." And Jamie suggested that they play the guy straight. By straight, he meant just have him talk like a regular guy who happens to be wearing a dress to get out. Jamie said, let everyone else comment on the guy. Don't have him comment on himself. To him, this is perfectly normal and very natural for what he's trying to do, which is to get a discharge. So the producer said, "Great, try it that way." And so the rest is history. By the way, E.W. Swackhammer never directed another MASH episode, although he was a very successful director on other shows, many of them quite famous and classic television shows. As far as I'm concerned, Jamie Farr nailed it. As he said, he came in for one day and stayed for 11 years. As Farr pointed out, Klinger was an original character, and nobody had ever done that before. Anytime someone had put on women's clothing in a show, it had been as a disguise, as in Some Like It Hot or Charlie's Aunt, or they did it just trying to be silly. Klinger, playing it straight as a regular guy, was a true original. Farr did 6 shows in that first year. In the second year, he did 13. And in the third year, they put him on contract. Of course, it's hard to fathom that someone could have dressed and acted like Klinger with his endless schemes to get out of the Army and not have been at least severely disciplined. For instance, a reduction in rank, if not actually discharged. But we are at least able to suspend our disbelief for the sake of the fictional world of MASH, given the characters of Commanding Officer Henry Blake and later Colonel Potter, and we are able to do so because Klinger is too great a character and too fun to watch for us to question reality too much. But if Jamie Farr had played him as Swackhammer wanted with an effeminate lisp, etc., this would have been impossible, just as it was impossible for Lenny Bruce to pretend to be homosexual and remain in the Navy in 1945. Even if a 1970s audience had accepted the character, they would have had a hard time believing in his existence. So was Lenny Bruce like Klinger? Klinger was certainly inspired by Lenny Bruce, but in the end, Lenny Bruce was nothing like Klinger. He wore women's clothing once and was actually discharged for pretending to be homosexual. I, for one, am glad that the producers called Jamie Farr up and had him shoot those scenes again, instead of just scrapping the whole idea. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you also glad that Klinger was kept on as a regular character on MASH?